Hello, how are you? When we talk about Alzheimer's, most people immediately think of memory loss, right? Whether it's forgetting names, repeating questions, not recognizing someone. But what many people don't know is that our brain starts giving us some signs years before anything seems wrong. One of the most silent signs happens in our nose. I'm going to talk more about this in this video, and there's a very interesting connection. Nowadays, researchers have even started calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of the strong link between insulin resistance, metabolism, and brain function. In other words, the brain can start to suffer many years before the more serious memory loss begins to happen. So I'm going to tell you what the nose has to do with this and how it can warn you ahead of time. What science has actually discovered about this? What is the relationship between glucose, inflammation, and the brain? And of course, the habits you can start adopting in your daily life to try to better protect your brain. You're going to love this video. No one is talking about this connection, which is so important. Stay until the end because you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask you if you have any cases of Alzheimer's in your family and if there was any change in that person's nose. Did you notice or did the person notice any change in this regard? Write it for me down here in the comments. Let's talk about this issue, about why our nose might give us a warning beforehand. It's a very interesting thing. First, we have to explain that obviously Alzheimer's doesn't start overnight. It doesn't start abruptly, as many people imagine. Science understands nowadays that brain changes can begin many years before the most classic symptoms appear. When we say this, we're talking about brain inflammation, vascular changes, that is, in the blood vessels, neuron wear and tear, abnormal accumulation of proteins in areas where they shouldn't be, beta amyloid proteins, and a progressive worsening of communication between these neurons. And one of the regions that seems to be most affected is precisely the area of our brain related to our nose, especially the part responsible for our sense of smell. The olfactory bulb, which is the region related to smell, is one of the areas closest to the external environment and one of the first regions where researchers observed changes related to Alzheimer's in some people. So, in fact, there are studies that show early accumulation of these beta amyloid proteins and others, related ones, in this region beforehand, right? That have symptoms before the symptoms related to memory appear. In other words, the area that usually starts to have the greatest accumulation of these proteins is this area related to the functioning of the nose. Besides that, of course, we know that our olfactory system has an extremely close connection with deep regions linked to memory and emotions, such as our hippocampus. That's why smell often has that power to take you to another place or another moment in your life, right? For sure, you've already smelled a perfume or a different scent and remembered someone you liked, a trip, a special moment, the birth of your child, a dish someone used to make when you were a child that you really loved. So the sense of smell has this ability to transport us to those moments, right? Connected to memory. But when these regions start to suffer changes throughout brain aging, the sense of smell itself also begins to change. And what's most interesting is that this usually happens slowly. The person starts to notice less of the smell of coffee, less of the scent of perfumes, less of the aroma of food, and which is dangerous, less of the smell of smoke too. Fewer smells in closed environments. And often the person thinks, that's just normal with age. My nose is getting older too. But it's not that simple. That doesn't mean that every loss of smell is related to Alzheimer's. I have to make this point clear to you before continuing the video because there are extremely common causes that can be related to loss of smell, right? Allergic rhinitis, a cold, sinusitis, even COVID itself became very well known because of that. Even the issue of smoking, right? People who have smoked for a long time can lose some of their sense of smell. There are medications that cause this loss of smell and natural aging processes that aren't related to any kind of brain problem. But when this appears together with other cognitive or behavioral changes, that's when we make the connection with Alzheimer's, and that deserves our attention. Many people can't realize that they're losing their sense of smell. This happens in a more silent way. So it's important that we try to pick up on practical signs to notice this in daily life, right? Let's start by seeing if you've been adding more salt to your food, because the sense of smell is also connected to taste. If you have trouble tasting sauces, if you've been using really strong seasonings and people say, oh my God, this is way too vinegary, too much garlic. It's too much for me, but for you, it seemed normal. Or you've been adding a lot of sugar, because when food tastes bland, many people don't make the connection with their sense of smell as well. Our sense of taste depends a lot on our sense of smell. So in practice, a large part of our perception of flavor actually comes from our sense of smell. That's why when you have a cold, the taste of food is diminished. And when your sense of smell decreases, food seems duller, more bland, less appealing. So this could be an early warning sign for you to notice. Now, another important thing, the initial signs of brain aging don't always show up first as memory issues, right? Sometimes they show up as a slower gait. A person who stumbles more throughout the day, has trouble keeping their balance, moves more slowly, walking more slowly, difficulty organizing your daily routine, mild confusion, trouble with tasks that used to be automatic for you. And the problem is that many people think, that's just normal for my age, I'm just getting old. But not everything that seems like aging is simply benign aging. That's the warning I want to give you here. That's why nowadays there's such important scientific interest in identifying early signs, because the sooner these cognitive changes are noticed, the greater the chances of investigating reversible causes and controlling these risk factors for you to prevent or slow down the onset of Alzheimer's. Let's talk a bit about this issue of type 3 diabetes, which in fact is a term that scientists are now using to talk about this issue of Alzheimer's, blood sugar, and the impact it has on the brain, because our brain works together, obviously, with the rest of our body. So it depends on adequate circulation of oxygen, nutrients, sleep, and a constant supply of energy throughout the day. And even though it's small, this is a very interesting detail. Our brain consumes an immense amount of energy because it works all the time. It doesn't rest at night. It works less, but obviously it keeps functioning throughout the night because you need your heart to keep beating, you need to keep breathing, you need your blood to keep circulating. So it's like a conductor for our body. And precisely because of this, metabolic changes can greatly affect brain aging. There is an increasingly strong relationship being studied today between insulin resistance, high glucose, and also chronic inflammation. This leads to metabolic syndrome for many people. And type 2 diabetes, right, which increases the risk of cognitive decline and brain deterioration. In fact, some researchers have started using the term type 3 diabetes because the brain also responds to insulin, and when there is insulin resistance, the brain seems to lose a bit of the energetic efficiency it had over time. Besides that, we know about the impact of diabetes on blood vessels, inflammation, and circulation due to this increase in oxidative stress as well. And all of this seems to contribute to progressive brain wear and tear. This obviously doesn't mean that sugar alone will cause Alzheimer's, okay? It's a much more complex disease. It involves genetics, aging, inflammation, circulation, metabolism, sleep, and many lifestyle factors. But we know that metabolism has a huge influence on brain health, obviously. And this completely changes the way we look at nutrition and prevention. Taking care of your blood sugar isn't just a matter of diabetes or physical health, it's also about the aging of our brain, our cognitive abilities, about reaching old age with autonomy, and with your precious memories as well. Let's talk a little bit about the more practical side of things now, about what helps protect our brain, because of course our brain will age better when our whole body ages better as well. And some factors seem especially important in this regard, right? The first of these is definitely sleep, because during sleep, our brain activates systems related to the removal of metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day. This is what we call the glymphatic system. In other words, the brain literally enters a cleaning state. So chronically sleeping poorly is known to be a risk factor for accelerating brain wear and tear. Another fundamental point that has been studied is physical activity, because exercise improves circulation, insulin sensitivity, brain oxygenation, chronic inflammation in the body, and overall vascular health. So staying active throughout the day is important, not just doing physical exercise for 30 minutes 5 times a week, right? Something like that, or 53 times a week, but also staying active throughout the day. There are people who exercise at one point in the day and then sit for the rest of the entire day. And that's not good for your health, for your metabolism as a whole. Another thing that is extremely important, of course, is diet, right? We know, for example, that vitamin B12 always needs to be checked in elderly people with cognitive impairment because a B12 deficiency can cause mental confusion, memory changes, weakness, tingling, difficulty walking. I have a really nice video here talking about things that seem like a disease, but are actually related to a lack of B12. I'll leave this video down below in the description. Another very important nutrient, which is being studied more and more, is omega-3. The brain is extremely rich in fat, so certain types of fat are directly involved in neuronal membranes, communication between neurons, and the myelin sheath. So it's important that we manage to consume good sources, even to help reduce this low-grade chronic inflammation. And omega-3 is wonderful in this regard. Besides that, we have to remember that protein is very important. Vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, and iron in balance are also important because they play a role in these important brain processes as well. And there's the issue of the gut nowadays, right? We're studying and talking more and more about gut health because there's a very strong connection between the brain and the gut. In fact, the gut is now considered our second brain because many neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, are produced in the intestines and travel through the bloodstream to the brain. I have an entire video explaining this in more detail. So, improving the intake of probiotics and prebiotics and reducing ultra-processed foods definitely helps a lot in this regard as well. So, noticing early signs of Alzheimer's or dementia is not a reason to panic. It's a reason for us to take action. It's very important for us to pay attention to the signals our body gives us, right? Having this self-awareness and self-care to look at ourselves is important, and it's also important to see a doctor if you notice any kind of problem. Don't avoid going out of embarrassment or even because of any prejudice you might have. It's important to take preventive measures to avoid faster progression or even to be able to stop such a serious problem. Tell me in the comments if you've ever noticed any changes in your sense of smell or in someone in your family, and if you had already made this connection with dementia-related problems. I would love to see your comment. If you know someone who could benefit, share this video. Let's work together to expand this chain of kindness. That's what I want here with the channel. See you next time. Bye.